Good evening, everybody, here in the Memorial Hall and elsewhere via Zoom. We hope you are sitting comfortably. Then we'll begin. Do you remember that introduction to every Listening with Mother broadcast? Well, Listening to Mother was first broadcast on the 19th of January 1950 on the BBC Light programme. It was to run for another 32 years. However, another more important broadcast, at least from the All point of view, took place a few days later, on Sunday, the 22nd of January 1950, when a group of villagers went to the BBC studios in Bristol to take part in a West of England home service. You remember the home service? Well, most of you do. West of England home service programme called Country Magazine. And tonight, we're going to attempt to recreate the programme using the original script, but not the original speakers. So just sit back and imagine you are in the village on Sunday, the 22nd of January, 1950, just after lunch, listening on your little wireless, if you have one, or probably sharing one with a neighbour or something like that. But before the programme actually begins, let me introduce everyone. First, we have the BBC announcer, who I'm sure many of you will recognise to be played by Jan Lamborn. Thank you. And then myself, I'm Desmond Hawkins. I used to live in Aldbourne, and I'm a radio producer and presenter for the BBC in Bristol. And then there's Pelly Barnes, a well-known character from the village. Tonight, he's played by Cassie Rust.
No letters from me today.
Pelly, real name, Walter Pelly Barnes. Okay, next is Gough Wentworth, a farmer from up at Ewins Hill. And tonight, John Diamond's voicing that part. And then we have Wilf Jerram, the builder, played tonight by Gavin Dixon. So following him is Mrs. Ada Barnes. She's the wife of Tommy and the moving force behind the bus and coal company and much village business too. Julia Hunt is playing Ada Barnes. And last of the villagers is Barney West, landlord of the Bell, the public house in the square, with Terry Gilligan doing the voices. Because we're a little short, we've got Jan Lamborn also doubling up as the voice of Frank Collinson, the programme musical director. And one famous person who took part was Johnny Morris. He'd only just been discovered by Desmond Hawkins, but he went along from the village to sing, but we haven't actually got anyone tonight who volunteered to sing that part, but we will try and cover that another way. So let's hear the BBC announcer start the show.
Good evening. This is the BBC Home Service from the West of England. We present Country Magazine, Aldbourne.
Come all you jolly ploughmen of courage stout and bold, that labour all the winter in the stormy winds and cold, to clothe your fields with plenty, your farmyards to renew, for to crown them with contentment, behold the painful plough. Dum dum ba-dum dum ba-dum dum ba-dum. Behold the worthy merchant that sails of foreign seas, that brings from gold and silver for those who live at ease. With fine skills and spices and fruits also too, they were all brought from the Indies by the virtue of the plough.
The programme is introduced by Desmond Hawkins.
It's a long time since I introduced Country Magazine, but I have a special reason for joining in this particular programme. You see, Aldbourne is my village, although I wasn't born there.
No, you're not a dab chick.
No Pelly Barnes. I'm not entitled to call myself a Dabchick. You have to be born in Albourne to be a true Dabchick.
Or ducked into the village pond.
Right, Gough, that's Gough Wentworth. But I wasn't ducked in the village pond either, so I'm not a Dabchick either way, by birth or by total immersion in the mystical waters of Albourne Pond. But I used to live in the village. I go back there when I can. And when it comes to the time to die, there's a very inviting churchyard, which has been thoughtfully illustrated in the Radio Times today. So by adoption and not by inherited right, I like to think of Albourne as my village. I suppose most of us, country born or just country lovers, have one place pictured in our minds that somehow sums up and represents all that we value in the countryside of England. I know if I was on the other side of the world and someone said to me, "Tell me, what's your country like?" The place I'd think of and the place I'd like to try and describe would be the village that lies rather remote and hidden in a fold in the Wiltshire Downs. A biggish village with quite a few shops, but shops, not branches of some multiple concern, and craftsmen of various sorts, and a thriving self-contained life. It's 8 or 9 miles from a railway station or a cinema. And the tradition here is still to look after yourselves without relying too much on the outside world. The old houses and cottages preach that gospel to you. Our walls made of the local Downland chalk and flint walls and a thatched roof. That's the typical Albourne house, isn't it, Wilfred? Wilfred Jerram's a builder, like his brothers, so he should know.
Yes, that's how they used to build them. And chalk's very hard wearing if it's kept dry. But there's more tile than thatch nowadays, since the fire.
Yes, like so many villages, Albourne has had its historic and disastrous fire many years ago. But those warm russet tiles put a lovely blend of colours amongst the thatch as you look down on the village from the hills around about. The third loveliest village in England, it's sometimes called.
I don't know why they say it's only the third.
It's placed anyway.
Voice of the jockey, always in the first 3, Barney West, who now keeps one of the village pubs and quenches the thirst of a younger generation of Albourne jockeys and stable lads.
I still don't know why they put Albourne third. There's nowhere lovelier.
I don't know either, Mrs. Barnes. Mrs. Tommy Barnes, this is. No relation to Pelly Barnes.
I dare say we're some sort of cousins.
Oh, shut up, Pelly. You're all some sorts of cousins in Albourne. Mrs. Barnes, I think there must be 2 other places that neither you nor I have ever heard of. We'll stake our case on Richard Jeffries, who lived a few miles away down in the Vale outside Swindon. He had an eye for beauty, did Jeffries, and he said the view of Albourne from Baden Hill was the finest in the world.
And quite right too.
Yes, indeed. Though I think I saw Albourne at its best one night when we'd been out tobogganing on the downs by the light of the moon. We came down to the village about midnight, towing our toboggan through the empty streets, everywhere silent, and the whole place gleaming white and silver with snow and the moonlight. That was an unforgettable sight.
I expect you've been up my way, up towards the Southern. I don't get much time for tobogganing, but when I'm out working on my bit of land, I like to look down over the brow at the village and the old church and all the houses clustered together. I think my farm is about the highest point in the village.
Yes, Scott. You're right on top of the chalk, aren't you?
Well, it's not a chalk farm, funnily enough. Up where I am, it's clay. You get that on the brow of the downs. The sides and heart are chalk, but this clay is like it had been smeared along the top, and it's thick, not just 2 feet thick, but 22 feet in some parts. Good growing land. I've got 44 acres. I'm only a small man, but I made a go of it. You know, there's nothing so honest as the soil. Whatever you give, it'll give back. Our clay wants plenty of lime to sweeten it, and then the cattle will peel the grass right down. Not a rough patch left anywhere. It was all derelict when I took it on, a worn out sheep run. 10 acres of it was scrub, just overgrown scrub. I had to clear all that. Well, all except 1 acre that I left because I'm fond of the pheasants.
Were there any buildings up there when you took it on?
There'd been an old cottage, but it had fallen flat, gone beyond repair. But there was a cart house in good conditions. And I was working as a bricklayer at the time, so I was pretty handy at making alterations. I couldn't afford to build a new cottage, so I made that cart house into a couple of decent rooms, and my wife and I set up home there. The council didn't like it, but I hadn't got much money in those days, and what I had, I needed to stock the place. So we had to do the best as we could with the cart house. We started with poultry and a few calves, and I went off bricklaying during the week. Just a weekend farmer, really. You couldn't sell milk then from such an out of the way place as ours.
No, of course, you're very isolated.
We certainly are. It's 1.5 miles to our nearest neighbour. And the road, or what we call a road, was disowned by the council long ago. But there's good at everything, if you look at it the right way. And a bad road has the advantage you don't get so many officials coming to visit you. When the Milk Marketing Board started, there was a big chance for us. They were willing to collect milk. And there's no doubt that milk is what pays for a small man like myself. I began with a pony and cart to bring my milk down to the village to be collected. I was given a pony by a baker who used to come up Blackberry near our place. Wanted to find a good home for him. He'll eat anything, will that pony? But his particular favourites are onions and fish and chips. Not a nice character to know. He'll as soon have a bit out of your coat as look at you. But he's a good worker.
That's what you want, Mr. Wentworth. I always say a lot can be forgiven to a good worker.
Then you haven't much to fear, Mrs. Barnes. There seems to be no end to what you and your husband can tackle. If anyone wants a bed for the night, or a load of coal, or a wedding breakfast for 50 or 60 guests, or a bottle of medicine fetched from the chemists in Hungerford, or even a coach to run an outing to Weymouth, the answer is to go to the square and ask where Tommy Barnes lives. The rest's easy. Well, it's easy for you and me, but not so easy perhaps for Mr. and Mrs. Barnes.
No, it wasn't always easy. We had to make our way step by step without anything much behind us. My mother always taught me to make something out of nothing, and I've always followed that rule. It's no good waiting for big things to fall in your lap. You must make the most of what you've got. I learned to bake before I was tall enough to reach the kitchen table. Mother used to stand me on a stool. We made our own bread in those days, 4-pound loaves, and we used to wheel them to the bakehouse in a pram until we had our own oven. My father was farming mostly, up on the Southern like Gough Wentworth, but he did some willow weaving as well. That was an Auburn industry in the old days.
Oh yes, willow weaving for hats. We had a loom in our house, and as a lad I had to serve the willow to mother while she wove it. 3 halfpence a square was the price, and it took a long time to weave a square.
There wasn't much money about then, but we found our pleasure in simple things. Home life meant a great deal to us. There were 8 of us children, and Sunday evenings after service, we always sat round the fire and sang hymns together. When my first brother went away, 3 went to Australia and a sister to America, we were so sad we couldn't sing anymore for a long time. I think it's losing the simple things and home life that's taking people's stability nowadays. Townspeople who come to Auburn sometimes think our life is dull. They say, Don't you get bored in such a small place? That annoys me because I think there's more scope in the country for using the talent that you've got. There's been no boredom in my life, certainly not in the 34 years since we bought the business where my husband worked as a young man, village carrier and coal merchant. And in those days, 1916 it was all horses at once. A break for Sunday school outings, a pony and trap to hire, a van and a wagonette. Everything horse-drawn. Our daily trip to Hungerford was Auburn's only transport, but within 2 years, horses were going off the road, and we felt we had to give them up. It's a bad beginning for us, and we weren't sure what to do. At such times, my husband's the pessimist of the family, and I'm the optimist.
That's the problem.
And I can tell you a very strange story about that. One day on a railway station, a foreign gentleman stopped and spoke to us. He looked at my husband and me and said, "This gentleman's nature is cautious and inclined to doubt. The lady is confident and full of hope. You're considering a new venture, which looks risky, but there's nothing to fear. Success lies ahead." I don't know what made him speak to us like that, but he was quite right. We sold our horses and bought a minibus. And of course, it was the better thing to do. Then I started catering, just on a small scale. First of all, I opened for teas. And after a while, I tried doing bed and breakfast. Various members of the family helped me. And now we do cricket teas, weddings, Sunday school treats, Mothers Union rallies, anything that comes along. I've catered for as many as 240 people at a sitting.
That really is work.
Oh, I like it. I've got most pleasure out of meeting other people. We've had a lady and a gentleman from Denmark staying with us. And during the war, we entertained scores of foreign men, Australians and Americans and German prisoners. The war certainly taught us to mix with people whose ways are different from ours, and it helped bring us together. I remember one American soldier who came to our chapel one day, and after service, I said to him, "Are you a Methodist?" He said, "Yes, ma'am." I felt we'd all been rather shy and reserved with him, so I saw him off in the square afterwards, and I said to my husband, "Go and ask him to come in for tea." So we did, and we became firm friends. And before he left Auburn, the American gave our chapel a new christening font. A very fine lot of fellows, the Americans. We made many friends, and of course I was glad they took an interest in our new chapel at Baden, because it had always been my ambition to see it completed. When we just had the plot of land, people said we'd never get the money to build a chapel, but we did, and without any big subscriptions. I asked the minister to authorize me to beg, and I sent my begging book to over 600 people, and bit by bit, we got the money in little amounts from ordinary folks.
Well done, Mrs. Barnes, but you're a redoubtable family when you start a job. I've seen Mr. Barnes take a couple of armchairs and a settee on board the bus without turning a hair. We just move the passengers up a bit. All along the road, you'll see a flag on a wall or an envelope in a window, and that means something else to come on board or some shopping to be fetched and delivered on the way back. A wonderful institution is the carrier's bus in the country.
There ought to be a song about it, but I don't know of one.
You're chipping in a bit early in the programme, aren't you, Frank? We're not ready for a song yet.
I never miss an opportunity of getting a word in.
Well, you must be patient for a bit. I want you to hear some village music first.
Village music?
Yes, you see, Albourne was a bell founding village in the past. They made bells here centuries ago. The typical Albourne sound is still the music of the bells. Just you listen. Sheep bells chiming as the flock moves across the downs. And at Christmas time, you may hear these.
Well, you- there we go. No problem.
These are handbells played by two ringers, each holding 3 bells in each hand. There's a knack in shaking your hand so that one bell rings and the others stay silent.
I should have brought my bell along with me. I'm the town crier, you know, officially appointed by the court of the manor of Aldbourne. Though I don't do much crying nowadays, but I used to. And once I was very nearly champion town crier of England, just lost in the final.
I begin to wonder if there's anything you haven't done, Pelly.
I've tried my hand at a good many trades. I've been a roadman and a postman, a soldier, of course. I was gassed on the Somme. And I've been a farmhand in Canada and a gardener and an engine driver. Not a railway engine, you understand, but a threshing engine.
Anything else?
A poet. Some of my poems have been printed. And I've acted on the stage in London and Manchester. And I've never passed the 4th grade standard at school. But I learnt a bit afterwards. And I went as a farm boy when I was 11. With 10 of us children to feed. So mother asked the schoolmaster if I could start work.
And never mind the full standard.
That's it. I'm still anticipating having to go back to school if the county council find out. But we needed the money. 3 bob a week I got, and £1 at Michaelmas, and as much beer as you liked. Well, after a bit, I thought I'd go for a job as a ploughboy.
Better pay for that.
Yes, the farmer said, "You're not very big, are you?" "No, sir," I said, "but I hope to get bigger." "Yes," he said, "I hope you will." And he took me on. In a couple of years, I got to be head boy, 13 years old, quite a smartish man. Next year, I tried to join the army to fight the Boers in Africa, but they wouldn't have me. So I had a turn of shepherding. Then I tried my luck as a chimney sweep. I did well at that. 9 or 10 golden sovereigns in my pocket. So I thought I'd get married. But my sweetheart didn't like me as a sweep, so I became a footman instead.
A footman?
Yes, all dressed up in livery in a big house in London. But I didn't like indoor work. I wanted to be out on the hills. And so I've gone on, never really settling down to a trade, but I've not done so badly. We've reared 12 children, and during the war, there was 13 out of 14 of us in uniform of some sort.
That's a record that will take some beating, but I still want to hear about your career as an actor.
It didn't last very long, but it was good while it lasted. It began with Charles McAvoy. Look, he was a playwright, a dramatist, and lived in Aldbourne 30 years ago. He knew a few of us old rustics, and he said we would make good artists. So he wrote a play for us, and he turned out the old malt house into a theatre. The first village theatre in England is what we called it. Well, we gets the old play up fairish, and then he thought he must have some music. He wanted a village band. Some of us was in the band as well. So he made a trapdoor, and we played in the band until it was our turn to go on stage. And then we popped through the trapdoor. All the big pots from London came down to see our play. Granville Barker came, and so did Bernard Shaw. They never frightened us to death. There was never such an occasion in Aldbourne, I can tell you.
Enough to give anybody stage fright.
Yes, though we never took no notice of going on the stage than going to the plough. But we knew Mr. McAvoy meant to travel with the play, and if Bernard Shaw and them didn't run it down. But we can't have done so badly, because we took the play to London and Manchester and round the West Country, places like Dorchester and Devizes. I believe there was even an offer to go America with it, but we didn't do that. Anyhow, it was £3.10 a week while it lasted. Good money in those days.
I hope you're doing something for the festival, Paddy.
I usually manage to have a penny or two at feast time, even if I had to go and dock pulling at night.
Dock pulling?
Weeding out docks in the field. 6pence for 1,000.
I think you ought to explain Allbourne Feast. It's famous, I know, but there may be one or two people who haven't heard of it.
Well, it comes on the old feast day of Allbourne Church. And I remember when we kept it up for a week, up at 4 in the morning, doing a day's work by 11, and to the feast till midnight. There'd be roundabouts, boxing booths, swings, donkey races, all manner of sport, open house everywhere, and plenty of food and drink. And there was backsword fighting.
My father fought with a backsword made of wood, wasn't it?
That's right. I saw it once, and I remember the rattling of the sticks as they fought. They had to go at it till blood was drawn. There was always a lot of gypsies at the feast, and there were great fighters too. They pitched little tents along the Hungerford Road and sold us black lollipops.
It all sounds very much what they used to be called a village wake.
And would I be wrong? And would I be wrong to suspect that your song today, Frank, is called The Village Wake?
Well, the title of it is The Lark in the Morning, but a village wake comes into it. It's about a ploughboy. I think it must have been well known in Aldbourne because the words were collected not far away at Purton.
Fair enough. And anyway, we've got a celebrated Allbourne character to sing it. The Lark in the Morning, sung by Johnny Morris.
Rises off her nest. She goes home in the evening with the two all on her breast. And like the jolly ploughboy, she whistles and she sings. She goes home in the evening with the two all on her wing. Oh, Roger the ploughboy, he is a dashing blade. He goes whistling and singing over yonder green glade. He met with pretty Susan, she's handsome, I declare. She is far more enticing than the birds all in the air. Try it! The lark in the morning, she rises off her nest. She goes home in the evening with the dew all on her breast. And like the jolly ploughboy, she whistles and she sings. She goes home in the evening with the dew all on her wing. Coming home from the rakes of the town, the meadows being all green and the grass had been cut down. If I should chance to tumble all in the new mown hay, and it's kiss me now or never love, this bonny lass did say. The lark in the morning, she rises off her nest. She goes home in the evening with the dew all on her breast. And like the jolly ploughboy, she whistles and she sings. She goes home in the evening with the dew all on her wing. It's our daddy. When 20 long weeks they were over and were past, her mammy chanced to notice how she thickened round the waist. It was the handsome ploughboy, the maiden she did say, for he caused me for to grumble all in the new mown hay. The lark in the morning, she rises off her nest. She goes home in the evening with the dew all on her breast. And like the jolly ploughboy, she whistles and she sings. She goes home in the evening with the dew all on her wing. Here's a health to young.
Oh, well.
That was very nice, Johnny, or otherwise called the Dubliners on that. Oh, what did you say?
Go on, go.
Well,
Hey.
they'll be wanting Johnny for the next village concert. He's a bit of a dark horse.
What do you know about dark horses, Barney?
Well, I've ridden a few in my time, ridden all sorts, but it's a long time ago. I was winning races before you were born.
You still win one every year, don't you?
I certainly do, but don't give me a horse nowadays. I have to do it on my own 2 feet. The veterans race at Allbourne Sports. No entries under 50 years old and a yard start for each year over 50. I'm 74, so I'm hot favourite.
I hope the stable lads turn out and cheer you home.
Yes, I'm good pals with them. They're mostly strangers to the village, and there's always a welcome for them at my place at the Bell, because I know what it's like to be far from your home with nowhere to go. I can remember feeling very miserable at my first place. It was always my ambition to be a jockey ever since I was old enough to find my way to Worcester races. That was my home, Worcester. And one day, a gent offered me a place in his stables at Middleham. I packed my few things in an old carpet bag and off I went up north, as pleased as Punch. But I couldn't settle down and I wanted to go home, but I hadn't got the money for a ticket. One night, a policeman found me crying and he asked me what the trouble was. I told him and he lent me the money to get back to Worcester.
That was handsome of him.
It certainly was a real Christian kindness, and I was very worried about finding the money to pay him back. I was only 12 years old.
I bet you managed it though.
Oh yes, I went in for a race at some local sports and won a salad bowl, and I sold the bowl for enough money to repay my debt. And then I made a fresh start, still determined to be a jockey. I went as an apprentice to the stables at Chiltern and served my time. 5 years, starting at the bottom as Copperoo Jack.
Copperoo what, Jack?
Yes, Copperoo Jack. That's the name for every new apprentice. He gets the job of lighting the copper and boiling up the mash. And of course, he gets some tricks played on him. If a horse doesn't fancy its food, he may be sent to the head lad for some green horse glasses.
Seeing the world through glass-coloured spectacles.
That's right. At Chiltern, each new lad was christened in the village pond. They ducked me and called me Barney, and that name's ever stuck ever since.
Did you ever get a ride when you were an apprentice?
No, I had to go to France to get my opportunity. There were no French jockeys in those days, and a friend of mine who was leading jockey over there invited me to join him. So away I went and did very well. And then I had the offer of a job at Ogbourne St Francis, just down the road. And I've been in this part of the world ever since. It's wonderful training country on these downs, of course. Lambourne, Manton, Beckhampton. They're famous names to every racing man.
And it was the same 50 years ago, Barney?
Oh, yes. There have been stables here at Allbourne for as long as I remember, and longer, I expect.
My father was a cooper, and I know he used to make oak buckets for the horses. Beautifully made they were, and finished with the colours of the stable.
The district perfect for racehorses, of course. So many roads and tracks come together at Allbourne. When they ride out to exercise, they go for 19 days without taking the same way twice.
And they like a change of scene.
Oh yes, certainly. Horses get round off with the same old walk every day, just as you or I would. But here there's variety, and on the downs the going is perfect. In a dry summer, the moss lifts up and keeps the turf springy. And in the winter, the chalk drains quickly and gives you firm, easy ground. It's never soggy, and it's never hard enough to jar your horse's legs. And legs are your main worry. A horse can't run without them. You get the habit of always running your hands up and down the horse's legs, watching for trouble.
It must be a worrying job when you're handling really first-class horses.
There's worry attached to it, but it's a wonderful life, a beautiful life. You travel all over the country at someone else's expense, and there's always plenty of excitement. I had my fling and enjoyed every minute of it. And then I got too heavy, so I found myself a little pub in Allbourne, and there I've been settled for just on 47 years. When I first came, gin and whiskey cost you twopence, and we used to serve beer in half-gallon jugs, open at 6 in the morning and close at 10 o'clock at night. And I've known men with a penny and stay all day.
Did they spend the penny straight off or wait for an hour or two?
Oh yeah, mostly they wait for someone else to treat them and pass the time talking and telling stories.
Well, a penny doesn't take you far nowadays, but you can still hear good talk and good storytelling. Go into any of the pubs. I won't try to count them, but Barney's isn't the only one. and you'll hear that slow, rich dialect humour that might have come straight out of one of Thomas Hardy's novels. I left a microphone lying around the other night in the bar parlour when Walter Lydiard was describing the old Albourne custom of having a fight in the square every Saturday night.
No, carry on.
Okay. He's a character.
Oh, yes, they always fought outside my front door. That was the traditional place. I've seen them stripped to the waist and go outside to settle it. I used to throw their togs out after them and lock the door. It was just high spirits and lack of something to do.
It was always the band, and that's a better way to work off your energy on a trombone or euphonium.
Provided you're musical, Wilfred.
My interest's always been in music, and banding's in the blood of our family. 3 brothers and myself, all in the band. And my father was a bandsman as far back as 1863. I was only 10 years old when I started. The bandmaster, I wanted to start, and he put me to work on the tenor horn. I always said I wanted to be a musician, even when I was only 6. And people asked me what I'd be when I grew up. I said I'd be a musician. And my mother said I should have my chance. But then my father fell into a long illness and times was bad. Mother just had to have the few shillings I could earn as soon as I was old enough to leave school.
So you never had any musical training?
No, never. I had to teach myself. But there's a real strain of music in Albourne, and one chap helps another with fingering and playing. You take your piece home and work on it until you've mastered it. Some brass bands are to be laughed at, I know, but there's a lot in it, and it takes a lot of experience to produce a nice sounding note and get the sentiment into it to make it musical. If you've got the feeling for it, you can learn, even if you don't get any proper teaching. We've always done a lot of contesting. I was only 14 when I first helped to win a prize. Since then, we've won prizes galore all over the auction. I remember once we went to Silchester to compete, and we'd entered in section 1, what you might call the top class. And then we found there was nothing in the rules to stop us entering section 2 as well. We didn't know if it was very sporty, but we got our expenses to think about. And in the end, we decided to have a go at both sections. When the results were declared at the end of the contest, we won all the prizes and all the medals for individual players. Everything there was to win, we'd won. And I remember one of the other bandsmen was so fed up, he shouted out, "Give him the blessed bandstand as well." Considering that we're only a village and we're all self-taught, we're very proud of what Albourne Band has achieved. Before the war, I think we were entitled to call ourselves champions of the South. Find a band to beat us, we had to go as far as Leicester Imperial or Birmingham City Police or Pontypool. But it took up a lot of our time. And in the end, my brothers and I had to look to our business and give up banding. When the war came, it put an end to the band. But now I've been persuaded to go back and start it up again.
I suppose you'll soon be winning all the prizes again.
Well, the young chaps seem just as keen as we were. And we won a few prizes already. It's a splendid hobby, and you have some wonderful times together. Christmas time, we always play carols around the village and outlying farm. Great nights we've had in the past, trudging up to Baden, then across the downs in the darkness with a carbide lamp on a pole, and some of the chaps playing as we walked. Once I remember the big drum got free and started to roll down the hillside with all the band chasing after it. And then we'd come to a farm and there'd be hot mince pies, sausage rolls and beer galore. The children on these farms were always kept up to hear the band play.
You used to come up to my Uncle Teddy's, didn't you?
I always remember him because he used to meet us with the biggest jug I'd ever seen. And I've seen some big ones. He'd put it down in front of the band and say, "There you are, lads. We can soon fill it up again." Christmas Day, we'd meet at 4 o'clock in the morning and play carols through the village until 6 o'clock. This year, we finished on top of the church tower. The church bells start at 6 o'clock, and some of our chaps are ringers as well. So they've done quite a good morning's work by the time the rest of you get up.
I think we should all have a chance of hearing this band. It's only a village band, its members are self-taught, and there's been no professional musician to lick them into shape. It ought to be funny, you might think. Well, judge for yourself, but I guess that you may be as surprised as I was when I went along to the Memorial Hall at Holborn and heard this.
Country magazine, The Village of Oldbourne, was introduced and edited by Desmond Hawkins. The music was arranged and conducted by Frank Collison with the Norman Brooks Sextet.
Well, for those of us in the hall, that's an opportunity just to stretch your legs a moment there and perhaps get a bit more refreshment from the bar, as we might say, this evening. We're going to have the raffle in a minute. And so just while Jan's nipping out to the kitchen, I'd just like to do a little bit myself, which has nothing to do with the 1950s directly. In fact, this is the 1940s. But it's to do with evacuees in Oldbourne. And I'll just mention that this is an extract from an article by Stephen Elliott that appeared in the Dabchick back in 1996. And this is about the arrival of the evacuees in the village. Some of the new officials had previously visited all the houses in the village to determine how many children each house could accommodate. The houses of the elderly and infirm were exempted if they wished to be. There was an allowance for money for rations for each child, so it was reasonably attractive to some households. To others, the whole idea of sheltering these children was unappealing. I believe, however, that they were all reasonably well looked after, and the evacuees designated for Albourne came from Dagenham in Essex. Now, the next part is not directly from Albourne, but it's an extract that might reflect the sort of feeling that these children from Essex, possibly even London as well, coming to a country location. And this is an extract from a book about Sussex and the evacuees, and concerning the London evacuees in Essex. So one London boy, and I can imagine this happening in Albourne, wrote a school essay for his parents entitled Beasts and Birds. The bird I am going to write about is the owl. The owl cannot see at all in the daytime, and at night is as blind as a bat. I do not know much about the owl, so I will go on to the beast, which I am going to choose. It is the cow. The cow is a mammal and it is tame. It has 6 sides: right, left, fore, back, upper and below. At the back, it has a tail on which hangs a brush. With this, it sends all the flies away so they will not fall into the milk. The head is for the purpose of growing horns, and so that the mouth can be somewhere. The horns are to butt with. The mouth is to moo with. Under the cow hangs the milk. It is arranged for milking. When people milk, the milk comes and there is never an end to the supply. How the cow does it, I have not yet realized, but it makes more and more. The cow has a fine sense of smell. One can smell it far away. This is the reason for fresh air in the country. The man cow is called an ox, but he is not a mammal. The cow does not eat much, but what it eats twice so that it gets enough. When it is hungry, it moves. When it says nothing, it is because all of its inside is full of grass. And there was another East End boy who was visited in a house, again, this could be Albourne, and said, "Coo, what a clean bed," when he saw the room for the first time. And 2 brothers from Greenwich, where they sat down to tea at a rather large family table for the first time. One of them observed to the other, "Blimey, the same pattern is on all of the blinking cups." And for 2 small girls, the new bedroom was a source of wonderment. One of them looked around very carefully and finally inquired, "Ain't there no holes for the mice to come in?" The lady of one middle-class family sitting down with evacuee children commented, "I don't know how on earth I'm going to feed you all on 8 shillings and 6pence a week." To which one small boy, being helpful, said, "You'll have to go out to work like mummy does." That's my little recitation this evening. I just thought it's even an opportunity to introduce him. So our main presentation and supplement are over. If there's any questions, of course, about the main talk, which was to do with the broadcast, we'd be happy to respond. If not, we'll begin to move on to the raffle in a moment, and there is some more refreshments to come. So thank you very much indeed.